Hey guys, tonight we wander back to a world that smells faintly of unwashed wool, muddy streets, and probably too much goat. You're stepping into the Middle Ages, a place where the air is thick with smoke from hearth fires and the idea of a hot shower is as mythical as a unicorn. You'll see markets bustling with chaos, children running barefoot through filth, and adults balancing precariously on the fine line between survival and disaster. Honestly, you probably won't survive this for more than a day without questioning every life choice you've ever made. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop a comment with your location and local time. I'm curious where in the world you're quietly risking your sanity by listening to me ramble about centuries-old grossness. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wander down a winding cobblestone street, and it hits you immediately. The stench. Not just any stench, but an overwhelming mixture of unwashed bodies, animal droppings, and fermenting food. People are shouting from stalls, hawking their wares, some fresh, some questionable. Chickens squawk as they're carried under the arm of a vendor who clearly doesn't notice that one is defecated right on his shoulder. Scholars still argue whether medieval towns had any kind of sanitation planning at all, but honestly, it doesn't matter. You're already overwhelmed. A stray dog darts past, teeth bared, likely scavenging for a morsel of meat someone dropped. You sidestep a puddle of something suspiciously red, probably not blood, or maybe it is, but in this world, it's almost impossible to tell the difference. Children run barefoot, their laughter mixing with the clatter of carts and the occasional scream of a goat resisting its fate. It's a sensory overload, a mix of sound, smell, and grime that assaults every nerve. As you continue walking, you notice the buildings lining the streets, timber-framed, leaning at angles that defy modern engineering, their upper floors jutting over the sidewalks like they're conspiring to crush any passerby who looks up. You catch glimpses of life inside, a mother stirring a pot with what looks like half a chicken floating, a child gnawing on a piece of stale bread, and a man sharpening a knife with the focus of someone who has seen far too many brawls. Everything feels close, cramped, and dangerously alive. Food, naturally, is a fascinating topic here. People eat things you wouldn't dare to touch. Blackened meats, pungent cheeses, and stews made of parts of animals you didn't even know existed. Oddly though, spices are prized because they mask some of the smells you're breathing in. Cloves, cinnamon, and nutmeg are luxurious enough to make you feel slightly safer, even if your nose disagrees. Scholars still argue whether medieval people really valued taste over preservation, but you notice that most dishes could double as a weapon if thrown correctly. The streets aren't just unpleasant, they're deadly. Potholes, uneven stones, carts barreling recklessly, and drunken townsfolk create hazards around every corner. And let's not forget that the law here is a flexible concept. Pickpockets and thieves operate almost openly, confident that most victims are too busy dodging horse manure to notice their purse is gone. You probably wouldn't last a day without learning some serious street smarts. Or a protective glove that doubles as a weapon. By now, your eyes are watering, partly from the smell and partly from trying to process this absurdly chaotic world. The sun burns weakly through a layer of smoke, giving everything a golden brown, slightly disgusting glow. You pass a fountain, which you instinctively avoid drinking from after noticing a rat disappear beneath its stone lip. Hygiene, it seems, is optional. Even the wealthier citizens, with their embroidered robes and polished shoes, carry a subtle stink, as if soap were a rumor rather than a reality. Somehow, amidst all this, life goes on. Children play, merchants shout, dogs bark, and a priest slowly walks past, looking vaguely annoyed by the entire human experience. You might catch yourself smiling at a ridiculous scene, like a man trying to carry a barrel of ale up a ladder, toppling it and immediately shrugging as if this happens daily. Quirky, absurd, and strangely relatable, this world has a rhythm that's brutal yet oddly captivating. You pause for a moment imagining what it would be like to live here permanently. The cold nights, the hunger, the constant awareness that disease could strike at any moment. It's a lot. But somehow, there's also an undeniable vibrancy.
Every moment feels raw and alive, each street corner offering a story, a smell, or a hazard that keeps your senses sharp. You realize that surviving here isn't about comfort. It's about being clever, alert, and maybe a little lucky. And as you continue down the street, your senses overwhelmed and your imagination running wild, you start to understand the first lesson of medieval life. Survival is messy, chaotic, and often gross. But if you pay attention, it's also fascinating. You'd never want to live here permanently, but as a spectator, it's almost mesmerizing in its relentless, unfiltered reality. You step cautiously into the streets again, this time paying closer attention to the obstacles underfoot. Piles of waste line the narrow alleys, a mix of human, animal, and vegetable matter that's been baking under the sun all day. The stench is oppressive, clinging to your clothes and hair almost immediately. You quickly realize that walking anywhere requires both vigilance and a stomach made of steel. Scholars still argue whether medieval towns were as universally filthy as chroniclers describe, but standing here, you're convinced the exaggeration, if any, is minimal. Children dart between your legs, barefoot and oblivious to the risk of stepping in muck that might harbor disease. You watch as one trips over a cartwheel, only to be pulled up by a laughing older sibling who seems equally unconcerned with the overflowing waste surrounding them. It's hard not to marvel at how resilient these little humans are, thriving in conditions you wouldn't dream of tolerating for more than a few minutes. Dogs roam freely, some chained, others feral. You see one scavenge in a pile of refuse, devouring something that might once have been a fish, or perhaps it's a finger. You can't tell. Pigeons cluster in the corners, pecking indiscriminately at whatever drops. You've read that medieval cities relied heavily on animals to consume waste, but watching it in real life makes you slightly queasy. The air vibrates with a mix of yelps, squawks, human chatter, and the occasional bell toll, a constant soundtrack to urban chaos. Merchants shout their wares, sometimes with exaggerated enthusiasm. "Fresh bread! Bread not full of worms!" One vendor is trying to convince a cautious customer that his smoked fish is completely safe, while another hawks live chickens that flail violently in wooden cages. You notice that negotiating is both an art and a survival skill. Arguing too aggressively can quickly escalate into physical conflict. Scholars still argue whether these marketplaces were more about trade or spectacle, but your senses tell you it's a terrifying mix of both. You duck under a low-hanging beam, narrowly avoiding a bucket of water sloshing overhead. It's raining lightly, but it hardly matters. The streets are already a mixture of mud and excrement, making every step a calculated risk. A horse-drawn cart barrels past, the driver shouting curses at pedestrians, while a stray cat dashes across your path, its fur matted and eyes wide. You can't help but think that medieval urban life is basically an obstacle course with slightly higher stakes than a modern city marathon. Food stalls are everywhere, offering snacks that would make your modern palate revolt. There's a pile of roasted meats dripping with fat, a heap of dark bread studded with insects, and a vendor selling congealed blood pudding that wiggles in the pan. You pause, just long enough to imagine what it might taste like, before quickly shoving the thought away. Curiosity could be dangerous here. Scholars still argue whether medieval people genuinely enjoyed these foods or simply ate what was available, but your instincts tell you it's probably more survival than pleasure. Laundry hangs from lines strung between buildings, swaying gently above the street like flags of practicality. Most of it smells faintly sour, as soap is rare and water is precious. You imagine trying to wash yourself here without attracting a crowd, realizing it's probably an exercise in futility. Bathing is optional at best, a luxury at worst, and the notion of deodorant is laughable. You notice a man rubbing herbs into his armpits, clearly convinced they mask odors, and you wonder how effective he truly is. The constant presence of waste, animals, and humans creates a soundtrack that is at once horrifying and hypnotic. You hear a cartwheel crack, a pig squeal, a merchant yell at a lazy assistant, and the distant clanging of a bell. Scholars still argue whether medieval towns were louder than modern ones, but your ears say yes. The chaos is relentless, immersive, and strangely alive. Every sound signals either danger, opportunity, or sheer absurdity. As you continue, you pass an open drain, the dark water flowing sluggishly along the street. You notice a rat scuttling along its edge, large and surprisingly bold, seemingly indifferent to the human chaos around it. You instinctively step back, but another rat emerges from a nearby pile of refuse, reminding you that city life here comes with roommates you didn't choose, and very few you'd invite to dinner. Despite the grime and risk, people interact and move with a rhythm you can't quite understand at first. Children play games in the muck, vendors haggle over pennies, and everyone somehow navigates the obstacles of a town designed without concern for modern safety standards. You realize that surviving here requires constant attention, adaptability, and an acceptance of the unpredictable, skills you hope you'll somehow develop before encountering a second day. By now, your nostrils are fatigued from the relentless smells, your ears overwhelmed by the cacophony, and your eyes adjusting to the swirl of movement. Still, there's a strange fascination in observing this chaotic world. You catch snippets of conversation, debates over grain prices, arguments about stolen chickens, gossip about the local lord, and realize that even in the filth, humanity persists. Every action, no matter how small, is a testament to resilience. You step carefully over a puddle that reeks of something unidentifiable, wondering how people manage their daily routines without constant nausea. Every encounter is a lesson in improvisation, dodging animals, stepping around waste, negotiating with vendors, and pretending not to gag at the food. Scholars still argue whether medieval towns were truly unlivable for newcomers, but standing here, you feel certain that the first 24 hours would be a brutal initiation. Finally, as you navigate past a particularly aggressive cart driver and a pile of unidentifiable debris, you begin to notice the odd charm amidst the chaos. The colors of fabrics, the rhythmic shouting, the faint aroma of baked bread weaving through the stench, all hinted life persisting stubbornly against filth and danger. You might not survive for long, but witnessing it, even as an outsider, is strangely mesmerizing, a vivid illustration of what daily life demanded in a time before sanitation, safety, and common sense.
You pause at a marketplace stall, eyeing a mound of food that would challenge even the most adventurous stomach. The smells are a mixture of smoky meat, sour cheese, and something you're fairly certain has been fermenting far too long. You notice a vendor expertly slicing off chunks of something that looks like a sausage, but could easily be made from parts you didn't want to identify. Scholars still argue whether medieval people truly enjoyed their cuisine or if survival instincts simply forced appreciation. But your instincts scream caution. Bread dominates most tables, dark and heavy, often baked with grain that's barely cleaned. Worms are common, yet the townsfolk seem unbothered, tossing away only the largest offenders. You pick up a piece cautiously and bite. It's dense, tasteless, and slightly gritty. You wonder how anyone could stomach this daily, Yet somehow they do, often paired with beer or weak ale to wash down the grit. Children munch alongside adults, seemingly oblivious to what you'd consider health hazards. Meat, when available, is both a luxury and a risk. Chickens, pigs, and occasionally cows appear roasted or stewed, but the freshness is unpredictable. You notice a chicken with suspiciously floppy limbs being carved for a customer. Did it just die days ago? Scholars still argue whether people in towns were at higher risk of foodborne illness than peasants in the countryside. And standing here, you'd bet heavily on the affirmative. You instinctively step back when a small droplet of fat splashes onto your sleeve. Survival, it seems, includes a lot of quick reflexes. Vegetables are similarly odd. Roots, cabbages, and leeks often arrive muddied and covered with insects, their appearance only marginally improved by a light scrub. Herbs are prized for flavor and medicinal purposes, yet their abundance is limited to wealthier households. You notice a woman selling bunches of herbs, her hands blackened by soil, smiling faintly at customers as if her cheerful demeanor could counteract the general grimness of life around her. Dairy is a dangerous gamble. Cheese can range from mildly off-putting to the absolutely revolting. One stall offers a wheel of blue-veined cheese that oozes as you approach. The vendor boasts of its fine taste, yet your nose rebels violently. Scholars still argue whether such cheeses were actually enjoyed or simply endured out of necessity, and watching the townsfolk nibble confidently, you suspect endurance wins. Butter is rare, often salted heavily to extend shelf life, adding another layer of flavor that modern palates might find challenging. Sweets exist, but they're a rarity. Honey and dried fruits are valuable and often reserved for the elite. You spot a merchant selling candied nuts, their sugar glimmering in the sunlight, a luxury you can't afford even in thought. Still, the colors are vibrant, the scent sweet, and for a moment you forget the filth underfoot. This is one of the few joys of medieval culinary life, occasional, fleeting, and often inaccessible. Cooking methods are primitive yet ingenious. You watch as a cook stirs a bubbling pot over a fire, occasionally tossing in chunks of meat and roots. Smoke rises in spirals, clinging to the low-hanging wooden beams. Fire is essential for survival, for warmth, and for keeping food barely edible, but it also means homes constantly smell of soot, char, and something faintly rotten. Scholars still argue whether smoke served a practical or purely ritualistic role in flavoring food, and you quietly admire its unintended usefulness in masking odor. You wander past a butcher stand, where the display of meat is both impressive and horrifying. Skulls, hooves, and offal are prominently arranged, sometimes with odd decoration, bones stacked like trophies. Customers pick through it, selecting pieces for stews or roasting. You realize that the skill lies in knowing which cuts are safe, which are spoiled, and which are good enough. Survival here means trusting instincts over appearances, a mental exercise you weren't fully prepared for. Spices are rare and expensive, often imported from distant lands. Black pepper, cloves, and saffron can elevate even the dirtiest meat into something palatable, at least for those who can afford them. You imagine the audacity required to season food in a time when ingredients traveled months or years to reach your plate, and you almost respect the effort. Scholars still argue how much spice improved taste versus preserving the food, but either way, it's a reminder that medieval cuisine was as much about survival as it was about flavor. Drinks, mostly ale or weak wine, are consumed constantly. Water is often contaminated, and townsfolk rely heavily on alcohol for hydration. You watch a man gulp a mug of ale like it's medicine, while a child drinks diluted beer from a jug, utterly normal in this setting. Scholars still argue whether this widespread consumption affected health significantly, but it's clear that medieval society had a complicated relationship with intoxication, hydration, and social norms. You move to the edges of the market, where street vendors peddle snacks meant to grab attention, fried pastries, roasted nuts, or something vaguely sticky and sweet. The children gravitate towards these, laughing and jostling for the best morsel. Observing them, you realize that despite the danger, the filth, and the hazards, people find ways to indulge in small pleasures. Oddly comforting, you think, that even in the worst conditions, life finds a way to sneak in joy. By now, your senses are overwhelmed with flavors, smells, and textures you didn't know existed or didn't want. Every bite, every smell, every sight is a lesson in adaptation. You understand why scholars still debate the actual enjoyment of medieval cuisine. It's a world apart from modern taste, a blend of necessity, survival, and occasional pleasure. You can't help but respect the resilience required to thrive, or even survive, in this culinary chaos. And even as you step away from the stalls, the aromas cling to you. You pass a small alley where smoke curls from a hidden kitchen, the scent of bread offering a fleeting comfort amid the stench. For a moment, you imagine sitting down and tasting something fresh, safe, and warm, an impossible luxury for most in this world. Yet it's this contrast between danger and delight, filth and flavor, that defines your brief glimpse into medieval food life. You realize that food is survival, social theater, and adventure all at once. Each meal is a gamble, every market a lesson, and every bite a reminder that you are very much an outsider in a world designed to test endurance. And while you probably wouldn't last long eating like this, observing it safely, imagining it vividly, gives you an oddly satisfying thrill. The medieval palate is strange, messy, sometimes revolting, but it's undeniably alive.
You step further into the bustling town, and it hits you immediately. Disease is everywhere, invisible but palpable. The streets aren't just dirty, they're alive with germs, bacteria, and viruses that modern medicine has thankfully tamed. Pustules, sores, and coughing fit your mental image of medieval townspeople, and you realize that every handshake, every shared cup, and every scuttling rat could carry something deadly. Scholars still argue whether plagues were exacerbated by poor sanitation or urban density alone, but standing here, the risks feel unavoidable. You watch a man stumble down the street, fevered and weak, as a neighbor drags him away toward a makeshift healer. The neighbor's hands are covered in grime, and you cringe at the thought of cross-contamination. You quickly remind yourself that in this era, survival isn't just about avoiding accidents. It's about dodging invisible threats at every turn. Sneezing, coughing, or simply touching contaminated surfaces could mean a slow, miserable decline. The smell of rotting food mingles with smoke and urine, creating an olfactory assault you can't escape. You notice flies buzzing incessantly, landing on every morsel of exposed meat, every unwashed hand, and even on children's faces. You shiver at the thought of what they're carrying, disease-carrying vectors moving from filth to food in seconds. Scholars still argue whether urban fly populations were the main culprits in spreading illness, but you're fairly confident they were at least contributing significantly. Sores and pustules aren't just medical concerns, they're social signals. People avoid those who show signs of infection, but avoidance isn't always possible in a crowded town. You realize that isolation is a luxury few could afford, and many relied on sheer luck to avoid exposure. The idea of quarantines exists sporadically, but enforcement is lax and inconsistent. A sneeze in the wrong moment could mean weeks of agony or an early grave. You catch a glimpse of a child with a swollen belly, pale and listless. Their parents fuss over them, trying to soothe and feed them, but you know that malnutrition compounds every illness. Life expectancy is low, and disease doesn't wait. It takes the young, the old, and the unlucky. The pervasive risk of death adds an edge to every action. Drinking water from a shared cup, touching a communal cooking pot, or even brushing past a neighbor, all are calculated risks. Scavenging rats, too, play a significant role. You spot one slinking along a drain, its fur patchy, its eyes bright. Fleas likely infest it, carrying pathogens that humans can't even imagine. The Black Death and other plagues have already visited many towns, leaving lasting fear. Scholars still argue about the exact transmission methods, but the presence of vermin, filth, and close quarters makes the conclusions painfully obvious to anyone walking these streets. You move past a baker whose open-air oven is both a blessing and a curse. Heat from the fire might kill some pathogens, but flour dust and unwashed hands spread others. You notice customers brushing insects off their bread before taking a bite, a minor daily precaution in a world that offers little else. It's a small, grim ritual that everyone silently accepts as part of life. Hygiene, or the lack thereof, is a major contributor to illness. Bathing is rare, water often stagnant or contaminated, and soap, when available, is mostly for the wealthy. You see a man wiping his face with a damp rag from a bucket of questionable water, and you wonder whether the act does more harm than good. Scholars still argue about the benefits of medieval hygiene practices, but standing here, the evidence of futility is painfully clear. Medical treatment is erratic at best. Herbal remedies, leeches, and mystical rituals dominate, often more superstition than science. You glimpse a healer applying a poultice to a patient's swollen arm, muttering prayers and hoping for divine intervention. Scholars still debate the effectiveness of these treatments, but you have your doubts as the patient grimaces in pain. The real safety lies in avoiding injury or infection altogether, something easier said than done in a city teeming with hazards. Every cough, every sneeze, and every fly reminds you that your immune system is the only reliable protection. Townspeople move cautiously, yet inevitably come into contact with contagion daily. You see a merchant sneeze into his sleeve and then pick up coins, while a child licking their fingers touches everything in reach. It's a network of potential infection points that modern science would marvel at, but for you, it's terrifying. The worst part is unpredictability. Disease doesn't discriminate logically. The well-fed can fall as quickly as the starving. A lucky dodge can save one day and doom the next. Scholars still argue whether epidemics were more deadly in urban centers or rural villages, but your first-hand stroll through this street makes the argument almost irrelevant. Everywhere you turn, the potential for illness looms. You breathe through your mouth, avoid touching your face, and step carefully, but the omnipresent threat gnaws at your awareness. Every corner presents a new chance of exposure, every interaction a calculated risk. You realize that medieval towns were alive in ways modern cities can't replicate, not just with people and animals, but with the persistent, invisible presence of disease. By the time you glance back at the crowded street behind you, a chill runs through your spine. This world is beautiful in its chaos, rich in sensory detail, but unforgiving. Survival requires constant vigilance, knowledge of risks, and a healthy dose of luck. You start to understand why few outsiders thrived here for long, and why the majority succumbed to the relentless hazards of daily life. Even as you step forward, carefully navigating past carts, animals, and children, the lesson is clear. Medieval life is not just dirty or smelly, it's inherently dangerous in ways that modern safety measures have thankfully eradicated. You may marvel at the resilience of those who lived here, but you also understand why you probably would not last a single day without some serious misfortune on your side. You glance around and notice that anyone who falls ill here is quickly at the mercy of what passes for medicine in this age. Medieval treatment is as strange as it is dangerous. Bloodletting, poultices, and bizarre concoctions dominate. You watch a healer lean over a patient, cutting small incisions with a shaky hand, and explaining that letting out bad blood will restore balance. Scholars still argue whether these methods ever helped or mostly harmed, but your gut instinct tells you the latter is more likely. Herbal remedies are everywhere. You see jars filled with roots, dried flowers, and mysterious powders. Some claims are harmless: chamomile for calming, willow bark for pain, but others are questionable. A small vial labeled dragon's blood catches your eye. The healer swears it will prevent fever, yet you wonder how effective it really is. The oddity of these treatments makes you appreciate modern medicine all the more. Bloodletting is particularly alarming. You witness a nobleman having a vein opened, a bowl catching crimson fluid. It's supposed to restore humoral balance, the medieval theory of health, but in reality, it often leaves patients weak, dizzy, and more vulnerable to infection. Scholars still debate whether practitioners understood when to apply this method, but your observation leaves little doubt that errors are common and fatal consequences even more so. Leeches also make a regular appearance. You see someone carefully placing them on a patient's skin, hoping they'll suck out the illness. You shiver as the tiny creatures latch on, and you realize that even if they worked, the psychological trauma is undeniable. Scholars still argue over the actual effectiveness of leeches, but watching them wiggle across pale flesh, you understand why modern medicine abandoned them. Surgery is rare and gruesome. A simple fracture or abscess might result in an amputation performed with little anesthetic. You catch a glimpse of a man bracing a patient as a barber surgeon begins cutting, his hands steady despite the screams. Scholars still argue about the survival rates of these procedures, but witnessing the scene, you suspect that success is more luck than skill. Disease prevention is rudimentary at best. People rely on charms, prayers, and luck more than understanding contagion. You see someone hang garlic around their neck to ward off the plague. Another wears a pouch filled with herbs. Scholars still argue whether such superstitions actually had any effect, but it's obvious that psychological comfort outweighed scientific efficacy. Quack remedies are everywhere. You notice a traveling vendor shouting about a cure-all potion, claiming it treats everything from indigestion to insanity. Curious townsfolk gather, some desperate, others skeptical, yet the seller's confidence is oddly persuasive. You realize that in a society where illness is constant and medical knowledge limited, hope often outweighs caution. Hygiene, or the lack thereof, makes treatments even riskier. Bandages are reused, instruments barely cleaned, and water sources contaminated. You glimpse a healer washing hands in the same water used for a poultice, and your stomach tightens. Scholars still debate whether any sanitation practices existed at all, but the evidence in front of you is unmistakably grim. You wander past an apothecary, its shelves crammed with powders, tinctures, and jars labeled in Latin. Some smells are sweet, others pungent, almost gag-inducing. The apothecary offers guidance, yet you suspect most advice is based on tradition and hearsay. Scholars still argue about the actual efficacy of medieval pharmacology, but you begin to understand that hope, intuition, and ritual were as vital as any chemical property. The psychological toll of illness is enormous. You see parents watching children waste away, faces etched with despair. You imagine living in a world where even minor infections could spiral into death. Surviving requires vigilance, caution, and acceptance that misfortune is never far. Scholars still debate the role of mental health in survival, but observing the faces of townspeople, you realize that resilience was both essential and rare. You notice the odd remedies people trust. Onion poultices, heated irons, and chanting rituals are common. A man applies a salve made from animal fat and herbs to a wound, swearing it will prevent infection. Scholars still argue whether these methods ever helped or were purely placebo. But standing here, you understand why desperation often outweighs skepticism. Even food plays a role in medicine. Diet is considered central to health. Warm broths and stews are prescribed to balance humors, while cold or raw foods are believed to cause illness. You observe a family carefully preparing gruel, adding spices to aid digestion, while nearby children nibble whatever scraps they find. Scholars still debate the scientific basis, but you note that survival often depended on what little control one could exert over daily life. Despite the oddity and danger, there's a rhythm to treatment. People negotiate between superstition and practicality, trying herbs, rituals, and minor surgeries in a cycle of hope and resignation. You realize that understanding medicine here is as much about psychology as physiology, a delicate balance between risk, belief, and desperation. Finally, you pause and reflect on the sheer absurdity of it all. Every cut, poultice, and strange potion is a reminder of how little was truly understood, yet how fiercely people tried to survive. Scholars still debate the impact of medieval medical practices, but watching it unfold, you understand that ingenuity, ritual, and sheer courage were humanity's best defenses against an often merciless world. You take a deep breath, though it barely helps. The smell is relentless. Every street corner seems to offer a new olfactory assault. You inhale a mix of smoke, human sweat, rotting food, and animal waste that clings stubbornly to the air. Scholars still argue whether people in medieval towns were desensitized to odor or simply adapted, but you can feel that your nostrils are fighting a losing battle. Trash and waste pile high against walls, occasionally toppled by wind or careless feet. You step carefully over something soft and squishy, hoping it's just mud. Flies swarm relentlessly, buzzing near your face and landing on anything that smells vaguely edible. You instinctively swat, but it's futile. The insects are too numerous, too fast, and seemingly unbothered by your presence. Even the tiniest surface, a loaf of bread or a leather glove, is no sanctuary. Animals, too, contribute heavily to the stench. Goats wander through streets nibbling on scraps and trampling anything in reach. Chickens flap their wings wildly, scratching dirt into every corner. You see pigs tethered near alleyways, their bodies slick with filth, rooting eagerly for scraps. Even pets, dogs and cats, carry the unmistakable scent of life that hasn't been washed for days, weeks, or even months. Scholars still debate how much these animals contributed to the spread of disease, but their odor impact is undeniable. Bathing is optional, a sporadic activity reserved for the wealthy or the exceptionally obsessive. You catch a glimpse of someone scrubbing at their skin in a small, crowded tub, water murky from repeated use. Soap is scarce, mostly imported and expensive, and the average person relies on herbs, vinegar, or just vigorous rubbing to keep clean. Scholars still argue whether medieval hygiene practices had measurable health benefits, but your senses tell you they mostly served psychological comfort. The wealthy attempt to mask their scent with perfumes, oils, and fragrant herbs tucked into clothing. You notice a noblewoman, her dress elaborate and her hair powdered, moving through a street thick with stench. Yet even she can't escape it entirely. The odor clings to fabric and skin, a constant reminder that sanitation is a luxury in this world. You step into a narrow alley and immediately regret it. The smell is more concentrated here, mingling stagnant water, decaying matter, and unwashed bodies. You cover your mouth and nose instinctively, though it barely helps. Scholars still debate whether urban planning could have mitigated the odors, but looking at the tightly packed buildings and winding streets, you understand why it never happened. Open drains run along the street, carrying a mixture of sewage and rainwater. Rats scurry along the edges, their fur slick and glistening, occasionally diving into the water for a quick swim. You imagine the diseases they carry: plague, typhus, dysentery, all thriving in this environment. Scholars still argue about the role of vermin in epidemics, but their presence alone makes the air feel alive with invisible threats. Markets, despite being hubs of commerce, are also centers of stench. Piles of vegetables sit next to rotting meat. Unwashed hands pass coins from vendor to customer, and every interaction seems to carry an olfactory penalty. You catch a whiff of something tangy and rotten, realizing that even fermented foods can't always mask decay. You shudder at the thought of touching a piece of bread that's been handled by dozens of people without washing. Animals in homes add another layer of smell. Dogs, cats, and even smaller livestock sometimes live indoors, sharing space with humans. You notice a child sleeping next to a dog, the fur blending with blankets that haven't been washed for weeks or even months. Scholars still debate whether cohabitation with animals was essential for survival or just an unfortunate necessity, but the scent tells you it's probably both. Even in noble houses, hygiene is compromised. Bathing is infrequent, water often reused, and ventilation poor. Smoke from cooking and heating mingles with body odor, perfumes, and the faint decay of leftover food. The air is a complex blend, an invisible tapestry that reminds you at every inhale that cleanliness is an aspiration, not a reality. Despite this, people adapt. Noses adjust to the omnipresent odors, habits form to avoid the worst offenders, and mental filters help townsfolk navigate daily life without constant gagging. You realize that survival here involves more than avoiding disease or danger. It's about enduring a world where every breath carries a reminder of mortality and resilience. By the time you leave the alley, your senses are dulled, but your awareness is heightened. Every step forward demands vigilance, not just to avoid physical hazards, but to navigate the invisible landscape of smells that dominates life in a medieval town. Scholars still argue whether humans can truly acclimate to such conditions, but your own experience suggests they can, though at the cost of comfort and dignity. And as you continue along the main street, dodging carts and flapping chickens, you can't help but marvel at human resilience. Somehow, life thrives in these stinking, crowded, hazardous spaces. You might not last a day here without gagging, but witnessing it gives a raw, unforgettable understanding of medieval existence. Survival isn't clean, pleasant, or safe. It's persistent, chaotic, and undeniably human. You shift your focus to the daily life of peasants, the backbone of medieval society, and immediately notice how relentless it all is. From sunrise to sunset, the peasants toil with little reprieve, their hands calloused, their backs bent, and their faces smudged with dirt that no amount of washing can fully erase. You realize quickly that survival here is defined by endurance, skill, and sheer stubbornness. Scholars still argue whether peasant life was uniformly miserable or occasionally tolerable, but standing here, you understand that it's overwhelmingly grueling. Fields stretch out beyond the town, small plots of land that peasants cultivate with simple tools. Wooden plows dragged by oxen, sickles and hoes are standard equipment, and every movement requires effort. You watch a woman bend low, her hands gripping a hoe as she breaks up the stubborn soil. The sun beats down, sweat dripping from her brow, and yet she continues. Her child sits nearby, mimicking the motions, learning the survival skills required to sustain the family. It's hard work, repetitive and unforgiving, but it's also essential. Meals are scarce and simple. You notice that most peasants subsist on bread, porridge, and whatever vegetables they can grow or barter for. Meat is a rare indulgence, often reserved for festivals or unexpected hunts. You see a family sharing a small pot of watery stew, each person taking only what is necessary to survive. Scholars still argue whether this diet was sufficient for health, and you think you'd struggle to last a week on such meager sustenance. Daily routines are dictated by seasons and survival. In spring, the land must be prepared and sown. In summer, weeds are pulled and crops tended. In autumn, harvest demands long hours of labor. In winter, work shifts to repairs, firewood collection, and mending tools. You follow a peasant through these cycles mentally, imagining the exhaustion and monotony. Yet somehow, life persists, anchored by necessity and community. The social hierarchy is omnipresent. Peasants are acutely aware of their status, answering to lords and local officials who claim ownership over land and labor. You notice the subtle tension in interactions, bows, respectful tones, and careful compliance. Any misstep could result in punishment, fines, or forced labor. Scholars still debate how strictly social rules were enforced in smaller villages, but you see enough evidence of fear and authority to understand that defiance comes at a price. Child labor begins early. Even at a young age, children are expected to contribute to household survival. You watch a boy carry water from a distant well, balancing the heavy pail with surprising skill. Another child helps weed the garden, hands small but efficient. Play exists only in fleeting moments, often blending seamlessly with chores. Scholars still argue whether childhood was universally harsh or occasionally joyful, but observing these kids, you see a delicate balance between survival and innocence. Peasants also rely heavily on communal work. You see neighbors helping each other build fences, repair roofs, or harvest crops, forming bonds that are both practical and social. Despite hardships, these cooperative efforts create a sense of interdependence that is essential for enduring the relentless demands of medieval life. Scholars still debate how much autonomy peasants had versus how much was dictated by lords, but cooperation seems to have been a survival necessity. Housing is simple and Spartan. Most peasants live in small one-room cottages with thatched roofs and dirt floors. Smoke from the hearth curls toward the low ceiling, carrying the scent of cooking, warmth, and soot. Livestock often share the space, adding both warmth and odor. You step inside one such dwelling in your imagination, noting the sparse furnishings, a wooden table, rough benches, and straw mats for sleeping. Comfort is minimal, privacy almost non-existent, and survival is paramount. Clothing is practical, coarse, and designed to endure wear. Wool and linen dominate, patched repeatedly to prolong life. You observe a man mending a hole in his tunic, his fingers rough and skilled. Scholars still argue whether peasants could ever afford brighter or more comfortable fabrics, but the emphasis here is clearly on durability, not fashion. Religion permeates peasant life. Daily prayers, seasonal festivals, and occasional pilgrimages are embedded in routines. Faith serves multiple purposes: spiritual guidance, community cohesion, and psychological support. You watch a small gathering at a village chapel, the simple rituals offering moments of reflection amidst an otherwise exhausting existence. Scholars still debate the influence of organized religion versus folk belief, but it's clear that both play critical roles in sustaining morale. Health is a constant concern. The work is physically demanding, nutrition often insufficient, and medical care rudimentary. A minor injury could easily become life-threatening if infection sets in. You notice a man wrapping a scraped hand with a cloth, his expression grim but resolute. Scholars still argue about mortality rates among rural populations, but the precariousness is evident. Survival is a continuous negotiation between labor, risk, and circumstance. Yet, there's a rhythm and resilience here that's hard to ignore. Peasants rise with the sun, labor through the day, eat modestly, and rest only briefly before repeating the cycle. Despite exhaustion, there's a quiet determination, a stubborn refusal to yield to circumstance. You realize that in a world dominated by unpredictability, community, skill, and endurance are the tools of survival. By the time you step away from the fields and cottages, the enormity of peasant life has settled in your mind. It's harsh, repetitive, and sometimes cruel, yet it's the foundation of medieval society. Without their labor, towns wouldn't function, lords wouldn't profit, and life as you've observed it in the marketplace would collapse entirely. Scholars still argue whether peasant existence was truly hopeless, but after witnessing even a fraction of their toil, you understand why enduring this life requires both resilience and stubborn courage.
You turn your attention to the lords and knights, the so-called elite of medieval society, and immediately notice the contrast to peasant life. Wealth, privilege, and ceremony surround them, yet beneath the gilded surface lies chaos, danger, and more social drama than you ever expected. Scholars still argue whether chivalric ideals were widely practiced or mostly performative, but standing here, you sense that spectacle often trumps reality. Knights stride across courtyards, armor clanking loudly with each step. You imagine how cumbersome it must be, the metal plates trapping heat, restricting movement, and weighing down the body. Yet despite the burden, these men train for battle daily, honing skills that might never see use in real combat. You watch one swing a sword at a wooden dummy, sweat glinting off his helmet, and wonder how anyone could endure such discomfort just for honor or spectacle. Lords oversee their lands from imposing castles or manor houses, issuing commands to peasants and servants alike. Their life seems comfortable, but appearances can be deceiving. You notice the stress etched into a lord's face as he negotiates tax collection, legal disputes, and potential threats from rivals. Scholars still debate the degree of autonomy nobles truly had, but you realize that power brings responsibility, and sometimes sleepless nights filled with worry, regardless of luxury. Feasts are both grand and hazardous. You glimpse a banquet hall filled with long tables, robed nobles laughing and shouting, meat and bread piled high. The air is thick with smoke and the smell of roasted meat, mingling with perfume and the faint odor of unwashed guests. Scholars still argue about how refined noble dining truly was, but observing this scene, it seems more about spectacle and excess than taste. You notice a servant carefully removing a fly from a platter, a reminder that even wealth cannot escape filth entirely. Political intrigue is a constant undercurrent. Courtiers whisper, alliances shift, and small slights can escalate into feuds or duels. You watch a young knight being reprimanded for a careless remark, his pride wounded, and realize that even in privilege,
Survival requires social cunning. Scholars still argue whether courtly drama significantly influenced broader society, but you can see how personal rivalries shape decisions, sometimes with deadly consequences. Knights train relentlessly, but injury is a constant companion. Armor doesn't prevent bruises, cuts, or broken bones, especially in practice or jousts. You notice a knight limping slightly, ignoring the pain to maintain appearances. Scholars still debate whether such endurance was celebrated or simply necessary, but you can't help thinking that survival in this world requires a delicate balance of strength, courage, and self-preservation. Life at court is a spectacle. Clothing is elaborate, embroidery and jewels abound, and every gesture conveys status. Yet beneath the glamour, there's pressure to conform, to maintain reputation, and to navigate the ever-present risk of scandal. You see a lady nervously adjusting her veil as she passes nobles, aware that a minor faux pas could have long-term consequences. Scholars still argue how much court etiquette dictated behavior versus natural personality, but observation makes clear the high stakes of social survival. Despite appearances, lords and knights are still mortal. Illness, accident, and violence respect no hierarchy. You notice a noble coughing, his cheeks flushed, and imagine how vulnerable he is despite wealth. Scholars still debate whether nobility enjoyed a significantly longer life expectancy, but standing here, it seems that privilege provides comfort, but not immunity. You watch a knight polishing his armor meticulously, the repetitive motion almost meditative. You realize that routine, discipline, and attention to detail are essential to survival here, not just in combat, but in maintaining status, avoiding shame, and navigating political tensions. Scholars still argue whether chivalric codes genuinely influenced behavior, or were largely symbolic, but you see practical value in the structure they impose. Festivals and tournaments punctuate noble life, offering both entertainment and danger. Knights joust for glory, spectators cheer, and accidents are common. You imagine the thrill of the spectacle, tempered by the awareness that injury or death could strike at any moment. Scholars still debate how much these events reinforced social hierarchies versus providing genuine enjoyment. But for you, it's clear that danger and performance coexist seamlessly in this world. Religion also pervades noble life. Chapels, priests, and ritual observances are constant reminders of faith's role in governance, legitimacy, and personal morality. You notice a lord offering a prayer before a meal, a small gesture of piety in a life otherwise dominated by power and spectacle. Scholars still debate whether faith genuinely guided decisions or served political ends, but it's clear that belief, and the appearance of belief, matters. Even leisure is structured. Hunting, falconry, and games are both recreation and social display, teaching skill, endurance, and strategy. You watch a group preparing for a hunt, dogs barking, horses pawing the ground, and participants issuing commands with precision. Scholars still argue whether these activities were primarily practical or performative, but it's obvious they reinforce hierarchy, skill, and reputation. By the time you step back from the castle gates, you realize that noble life is a complex blend of luxury, risk, performance, and responsibility. Survival here isn't measured solely by avoiding physical danger. It's about navigating a world of social codes, political intrigue, and personal ambition. Scholars still debate the real impact of nobility on society, but observing them closely, you understand that life at the top is a precarious balance of privilege and peril. You leave the sight of lords and knights with a new appreciation. While peasants endure relentless labor, nobles navigate relentless expectation. Both worlds are dangerous, each in its own way, and neither offers guarantees of comfort or longevity. You sense that in medieval society, survival is a complex dance between physical endurance, social cunning, and a fair amount of luck. You make your way toward a looming stone fortress on the horizon, its silhouette cutting into the sky like a jagged crown. From a distance, it looks majestic, almost regal, but as you draw closer, the illusion fades. Castles, you quickly realize, are not the fairy tale havens you imagined. They're cold, damp, echoing labyrinths of discomfort disguised as power. Scholars still argue whether castles were symbols of luxury or defense, but the truth lies somewhere in between. Beautiful prisons for the privileged. Crossing the drawbridge, you feel the air shift, colder, heavier. The smell of wet stone and burning tallow fills your nose. Inside the courtyard, life buzzes in organized chaos. Servants rush about carrying buckets of water, hay bales, or trays of food. The clang of metal rings through the space as blacksmiths hammer horseshoes and armor. Dogs bark, chickens scuttle underfoot, and somewhere a child laughs before being hushed by a tired nursemaid. The place feels alive, but never peaceful. You glance up at the towering walls, their stone blocks slick with moisture. Moss creeps between the cracks. Water seeps in through unseen fissures, making the air perpetually damp. Inside, torchlight flickers along narrow corridors, casting long, ghostly shadows. You reach out to touch the wall, cold as ice, rough to the fingertips. Even in summer, the chill seeps through your clothes, reminding you that warmth is an expensive luxury. The Great Hall is impressive at first glance. Banners hang from the rafters, long tables stretch beneath the glow of candles, and an enormous hearth crackles with fire. Yet, despite the fire, the warmth barely reaches your seat. The stone walls absorb it, leaving pockets of cold that creep up your legs. You shiver slightly, realizing that no matter how many furs or tapestries hang here, comfort is limited. Scholars still debate how effective medieval insulation was, but standing here, it's obvious that cozy was never part of the design. Food arrives, and the spectacle continues. Trays of roasted meat, bread, and wine fill the table. But hygiene remains questionable. Dogs roam freely underfoot, snapping up scraps, while servants reuse knives to carve multiple dishes. You take a tentative bite of bread. It's hard, chewy, and faintly smoky from the hearth. Still, it's better than what the peasants outside get, and you can't complain too loudly in a world where complaining to a lord could cost you more than dinner. Sleeping arrangements are another revelation. Forget soft beds and privacy. Most castle residents share crowded chambers. Servants often sleep on straw near kitchens or corridors, while nobles share beds for warmth or lack of space. You peek into one of these rooms, furs piled atop straw mattresses, tapestries fluttering slightly from the draft that seeps in through arrow slits. The fire sputters low in the hearth, leaving the corners shrouded in darkness. Scholars still argue whether people truly minded the lack of privacy, but you suspect exhaustion made modesty irrelevant. The noise never stops. Metal boots echo against stone floors. Somewhere, a guard coughs. A dog growls in its sleep. Even the fire pops and hisses like a restless creature. You realize that silence, true silence, is rare in a castle. Everything echoes. Laughter, arguments, even the faint hum of wind whistling through cracks in the walls. It's beautiful, yes, but also haunting. You explore further, climbing narrow staircases that twist unexpectedly, lit only by weak torchlight. The air grows colder as you ascend. You reach the battlements and step outside into biting wind. Below, the landscape spreads endlessly. Fields, forests, and winding rivers under a dull gray sky. You feel small, insignificant, and deeply aware of how isolated life inside these walls must be. Scholars still debate whether castle life encouraged introspection or paranoia, but standing here, surrounded by silence and sky, both feel plausible. Bathrooms, or rather the medieval version of them, offer another surprise. Garderobes, as they're called, are little more than holes in the wall leading straight down to the moat or cesspit. You imagine the smell on a warm day and shudder. Perfumed herbs and scented rushes can't disguise everything. You wonder how anyone could sit here in peace, knowing the castle's defenses are quite literally built over its waste. Scholars still argue whether garderobes were hygienic innovations or just primitive necessities. But you know one thing for sure: you'd never call this royal comfort. Despite discomfort, castles symbolize order and safety. Outside these walls, chaos reigns. Bandits, war, disease. Inside, you feel protected, even if it's an illusion. The thick stone, the guards on watch, the gates drawn tight, all give a sense of control in an uncontrollable world. It's easy to see why lords built them, not just as homes, but as statements. A castle says, "I endure." You pause by a window slit, gazing at the courtyard below. Smoke rises from the kitchen chimney, mixing with mist that curls over the battlements. Somewhere a bell tolls, marking the passing of another hour in a life defined by duty and discomfort. You feel the weight of time here, how slowly it moves, how heavy each day must feel for those confined by stone and hierarchy. By the time you leave the castle, you understand that its beauty is deceptive. Yes, it commands the landscape, inspires awe, and radiates authority, but it's also a cold, noisy, smoky world that demands endurance. Comfort, as always in medieval life, comes second to survival. Scholars still debate whether the grandeur justified the hardship, but from what you've experienced, it's clear. Even in power, medieval life never truly lets you rest. You glance back once more as the drawbridge creaks shut behind you. The wind whistles through the towers, carrying faint echoes of laughter, clanging metal, and barking dogs. The castle stands proud but weary, an eternal reminder that even the mightiest walls can't keep out discomfort, decay, or the smell of burning tallow.
You probably think you can handle a little medieval discomfort by now, until you encounter their hygiene habits. Brace yourself, because this is where survival really becomes questionable. If you've ever complained about weak water pressure in your modern shower, imagine sharing a wooden tub of reused water with your entire household, and then realizing it hasn't been changed for days. Scholars still argue whether medieval people truly feared bathing for health reasons or simply lacked the means, but either way, you're about to appreciate your bathroom more than ever. Let's start with the toilets, or as they were optimistically called, garderobes. These were narrow stone chambers with a hole cut into a bench, often built right into castle walls. Below, a pit or moat full of waste. You can feel the draft rushing upward,
bringing with it a pungent reminder of exactly where that hole leads. Imagine using it in the dead of winter, your breath fogging, the stone beneath you freezing, the smell so strong it could wake the dead. Scholars still argue whether herbs strewn on the floor were for decoration or survival, but you'd bet on the latter. In villages, it's worse. Peasants rely on simple outdoor pits, or, when desperate, any hidden corner. You pass one such pit behind a cottage, buzzing with flies and surrounded by trampled grass. The smell hits you like a wall. Children run past barefoot, completely unfazed. You think about how long you'd last here, and the answer is, not very. Bathing is another adventure. Public bathhouses do exist in larger towns, though they double as social hubs and, occasionally, less reputable establishments. You watch a group gather near one, carrying towels and buckets of steaming water. Inside, wooden tubs line the walls, filled with cloudy water that's been used and reused. People sit shoulder to shoulder, scrubbing half-heartedly, chatting as though hygiene is secondary to gossip. You notice the occasional floating leaf or hair drifting lazily in the water, and feel your stomach turn. Scholars still argue whether these bathhouses spread more disease than they cured, and honestly, you wouldn't take the risk. For those who can't afford bathhouses, and that's most people, washing happens at home. A small basin, a damp cloth, maybe some vinegar or herbs if you're fancy. Full-body bathing is rare, often reserved for special occasions or medical treatments. Instead, people freshen up by rubbing themselves with cloths or sprinkling scented powders. You see a woman doing just that, humming softly as she pats her arms and face with a damp rag. It's more ritual than sanitation, but in a world where water is scarce and often filthy, it's the best she can do. And let's talk about laundry, or rather, the lack of it. Clothes aren't washed often, especially in winter. Water sources are icy, soap expensive, and drying takes forever. People rely on airing garments outside or beating them in streams. You watch a group of women knee-deep in a river pounding tunics and blankets against rocks while gossiping. The current carries away the dirt, but the chill seeps into their bones. Scholars still argue whether natural lye soap or ashes were more effective cleansers, but watching this, you realize both require effort and endurance. To mask odors, herbs and flowers become essential tools. Lavender, rosemary, and sage are tucked into clothing, worn in pouches, or burned to freshen air. Even nobles rely on these tricks, carrying perfumed handkerchiefs or wearing pomanders, small, fragrant balls filled with spices. You imagine walking through a castle corridor, catching whiffs of clove and rosewater struggling to overpower the stench of humanity. Scholars still debate whether these fragrances improved health by purifying the air or simply made it bearable. Either way, they're a medieval necessity. Teeth cleaning, meanwhile, is a minimalist affair. No toothpaste, no minty freshness, just rough linen cloths and crushed herbs. Some use salt, others ash or even ground bone. You watch a man scrub his teeth vigorously, spitting into the dirt, before flashing a grin that reveals more gaps than enamel. Scholars still argue whether tooth decay was less common due to sugar scarcity, but hygiene clearly wasn't the priority here. Hair care isn't much better. Lice are constant companions, and combing the hair is practically a social activity. You see two women sitting by a window, one patiently parting the other's hair and crushing tiny invaders between her fingernails. They chat calmly, as though this is just another part of the day, which, for them, it is. You fight the urge to scratch your scalp in sympathy. Scholars still argue whether herbal rinses effectively repelled lice, but observation suggests the bugs always won. Even the wealthy can't escape these realities. bathing requires enormous effort. Heating water, hauling it upstairs, filling tubs, and disposing of the waste. You watch servants struggle with buckets, the steam fogging up stone walls. By the time the bath is ready, the water is already cooling. The lady of the house steps in gracefully, surrounded by candles and rose petals, but you know the comfort is fleeting. Within minutes, the chill returns, and she'll be back to powder and perfume, to fake cleanliness. As night falls, the smells of the day linger. Sweat, smoke, damp cloth, and the faint odor of tallow candles. You lie down on a straw mattress and pull a rough blanket over yourself, realizing the irony. Despite all the effort, medieval hygiene is less about staying clean and more about surviving filth gracefully. Scholars still argue whether medieval people were truly dirty by their standards, but to your modern nose, the answer's pretty clear. You close your eyes and imagine going a week without soap, toilet paper, or clean water. It's a humbling thought. You'd probably complain for an hour and then surrender. But the people here, they endure, adapting, improvising, and somehow carrying on through centuries of smells, stains, and survival. So, next time you step into your hot shower and reach for your lavender-scented shampoo, remember, somewhere in the 14th century, a tired peasant is shaking their head at your luxury, covered in dust, but perfectly content that their hands are at least cleaner than their feet. You wake to the sound of bells ringing across the town. Festival day. Finally, a break from the constant toil, though fun in medieval times comes with its own brand of chaos. You stretch, step outside, and feel the energy in the air. The streets are alive with color, movement, and the overwhelming smell of roasting meat mixed with unwashed bodies. For a brief moment, life here feels almost joyful. Almost. Scholars still argue whether festivals truly provided relief for commoners, or were just distractions from hardship. But for now, you'll take it as the closest thing to a vacation you're getting. Banners flap overhead, painted with crude yet vibrant symbols. Stalls pop up along the muddy streets, some selling roasted sausages, others tankards of ale, and a few suspicious concoctions you'd rather not ask about. Jugglers throw flaming torches dangerously close to their hair, while musicians bang out rhythmic tunes on drums and bagpipes. The noise is infectious. Children chase each other between barrels, dogs bark wildly, and laughter erupts in pockets. You can almost forget the filth and fatigue that usually define this world. Almost. You buy a small pastry from a vendor, warm, sticky, and probably older than it looks. The man flashes a grin with only half his teeth and wishes you good luck. You take a bite anyway, hoping your stomach has adjusted to medieval resilience. The sweetness hits first, then something questionable. Maybe the hint of last week's butter. You decide not to think too hard about it. Nearby, a crowd gathers around a wooden platform. Two men in bright colors are mock fighting with wooden swords, pretending to be knights. The audience cheers, laughing when one dies dramatically. But beneath the laughter, you sense something darker. There's a roughness to the crowd, an eagerness for real violence. Scholars still argue whether medieval festivals were peaceful or simmering with aggression, but watching this, you suspect the latter. Ale flows freely, and inhibitions vanish. A group of men sings loudly, sloshing drink over each other's tunics, while two women dance barefoot in the mud. You can smell the alcohol in the air, sharp and sour. You remember hearing that beer is safer than water here, and after seeing the rivers, you don't doubt it. Still, you wonder how many fights this much liquid courage will inspire before the sun sets. Performers move through the crowd, jesters with jingling hats, fire eaters whose breath smells faintly of oil, and musicians strumming out bawdy songs. You catch snippets of lyrics, mostly about love, wine, and questionable morals. The humor is crude, the laughter genuine. You find yourself smiling, not because it's particularly funny, but because for once, the people around you seem alive in a way that transcends survival. Scholars still argue whether humor acted as rebellion or relief, but either way, it's necessary. As afternoon stretches on, competitions begin. Archery contests draw skilled peasants, their bows carved from local wood. The thud of arrows hitting straw targets echoes through the square. Nearby, a wrestling match starts. The participants strip to their waists, muscles slick with sweat and dirt. The crowd roars as one man lifts the other clean off the ground. You wince at the impact as they tumble into the mud. Even here, entertainment comes with bruises. Food vendors shout over the din. Roasted goose, honeyed nuts, meat pies, and tankards of ale. Smoke hangs thick in the air. You try to step around a puddle, but fail. Mud splashes up your legs. Nobody cares. Everyone is equally filthy. A group of children chases a pig through the crowd, squealing louder than the animal. For a moment, even the lords seem amused, their guards watching with weary smiles. But not everything is festive. In the corner, a preacher stands on a wooden box, shouting about sin and repentance. Some listen, most don't. He warns that laughter invites the devil, that indulgence leads to ruin. You watch a drunk man toss a crust of bread at him, missing narrowly. The preacher doesn't flinch. He's used to it. Scholars still argue whether such public preaching was tolerated or ridiculed, but here, it's just another act in the show. As night falls, the mood shifts. Torches flicker, faces glow orange, and shadows stretch long across the ground. Music grows louder, more chaotic. Someone starts a bonfire in the center of the square, and the crowd gathers around it, clapping and shouting. Dancers spin wildly, skirts twirling, boots thudding against packed earth. You feel the heat of the flames, smell the smoke and sweat, hear the rhythm of drums blending with laughter and argument. It's intoxicating and unsettling all at once. Then a scuffle breaks out. Two men, both drunk, shove each other over spilled ale. The crowd parts, half cheering, half wary. A few punches fly before others intervene, dragging them apart. You realize how thin the line is between celebration and chaos. Scholars still debate whether festivals were tools of unity or outlets for aggression, but tonight they feel like both, a fragile balance between joy and madness. When the fire burns low, the laughter softens. People drift away, some singing, some stumbling. The streets are littered with discarded cups, bits of bread, and the occasional sleeping body. The air smells of smoke, ale, and satisfaction. Despite the grime, the noise, and the occasional brawl, you can't help but feel that these moments of release are what make medieval life bearable. You walk away slowly, your boots squelching in the mud, and look back at the dim glow of the dying fire. Tomorrow, everyone will return to toil, taxes, and the grind of survival. But tonight, for a few fleeting hours, they were human, laughing, dancing, forgetting. And in a world this harsh, that's a victory in itself.
The morning after the festival is quiet, eerily quiet. You step out of your wooden doorway to find the streets coated in mud, trash, and hangovers. The air is heavy with stale ale and the faint sweetness of decaying food. You pick your way through the debris, watching as half-awake townsfolk sweep, shovel, and grumble. Medieval cleanup, you realize, is more about pushing dirt around than actually removing it. Scholars still argue whether sanitation duties after festivals were organized or purely voluntary, but from what you see, it's clearly the latter.
You pass a man slumped against a barrel, snoring with his mouth open. His hand still clutches a half-empty mug. A dog licks the foam at his fingertips. Across the square, a woman wrings out a dirty cloth into the gutter, muttering curses under her breath. The echoes of last night's revelry hang in the air. Faint music, a memory of laughter, and a few broken dreams scattered like pottery shards. But there's work to be done, always. The baker's oven is already roaring, the blacksmith hammering once more. Life here never really stops. It just takes short, messy detours. You wander toward the fields, drawn by the sound of bleating goats and the rhythmic clink of tools. Beyond the walls, the countryside stretches wide and raw. The air smells better out here, though not by much. You take a deep breath anyway, savoring the faint scent of soil over sewage. Peasants bend over furrows, planting and weeding with the kind of exhaustion that looks permanent. Their hands are cracked, their clothes patched, their backs bent in shapes that seem unnatural. You join them briefly, curious about the rhythm of it. The wooden hoe feels clumsy in your hands, and within minutes your shoulders ache. Sweat beads on your forehead, and the sun, unrelenting, turns your skin sticky. You understand quickly why peasants age fast. They live outside time, tethered to the cycle of growth and decay. A man beside you grins through missing teeth. He says, "Hard work, eh?" You nod, trying to keep up, though your blisters are already forming. He laughs. "You'll get used to it, or die before you do." You can't tell if it's a joke. Scholars still argue whether medieval peasants found dignity in their labor or simply endured it. But standing here, it feels like both. Lunch is simple. Bread, cheese, maybe some onion or salted pork if you're lucky. You sit under a tree with the others, sharing silence. Conversation is rare, reserved for gossip or weather. You notice the hands around you, rough, scarred, each callus a record of survival. You chew your bread slowly, feeling the grit of dirt between your teeth. It's oddly grounding. The breeze carries distant church bells, marking another hour in a day that feels eternal. As the sun moves, you see how the fields pulse with quiet life. Birds swoop between crops, insects hum, and somewhere a shepherd whistles to his flock. Despite the hardship, there's rhythm, almost poetry in this repetition. You find yourself lulled by the sound of rakes scraping soil, of oxen snorting, of boots crunching gravel. For a moment, you almost forget the filth and pain. But reality bites back quickly. You hear a shout. A man has cut his hand on a blade, blood spilling into the dirt. Another runs for help, though help means a rag and maybe some herbs. The injured man clenches his teeth, his face pale. You know infection is likely, inevitable even. No antibiotics, no sterile bandages. Scholars still debate how common fatal infections were, but in this world, any wound can be a death sentence. By afternoon, clouds gather. Rain begins to fall, soft at first, then relentless. Mud swallows the fields, and everyone keeps working. You wipe water from your eyes, feeling the cold seep through your clothes. There's no running for shelter. Crops can't wait for comfort. You glance around, noticing the farmers trudging on with quiet acceptance. They've seen worse: floods, droughts, plagues. To them, rain is mercy. To you, it's misery. When the rain finally eases, the landscape glows in muted gold. Puddles reflect the sky, and steam rises from the earth. The smell of wet soil mingles with sweat and smoke from distant cottages. You realize how beautiful and brutal this world is in equal measure. Every breath is survival, every small joy hard-won. As evening falls, the farmers trudge back home, shoulders bowed. You follow, your legs heavy, your hands stained. Inside a cottage, the fire crackles weakly. A pot of stew bubbles, turnips, maybe a hint of meat. You sit by the hearth, legs stretched toward the warmth. The woman of the house stirs the pot, humming softly. Her voice is low, steady, almost prayerful. You eat in silence. The stew tastes of smoke and salt. The flicker of fire paints the walls with trembling light. Outside, frogs croak in puddles, and the wind whispers through thatched roofs. You close your eyes and listen. The day's exhaustion seeps into your bones, but beneath it all, there's something strangely peaceful. Maybe it's the simplicity, maybe it's the resignation, or maybe it's the understanding that survival here isn't about winning, it's about enduring. As you drift toward sleep, the last thing you hear is the soft crackle of wood and the distant toll of a bell. Another day ends, indistinguishable from the one before it. But to the people here, that's enough. Living one more day is victory enough.
The next morning begins with cold mist hugging the earth. You wake up stiff, your body still sore from yesterday's labor. The fire has long since burned out, leaving only a faint trail of smoke winding toward the ceiling. You stretch your aching limbs and step outside into the pale dawn light. Dew clings to the grass, and your breath forms small clouds in the chill air. The village is slowly coming alive, roosters crowing, doors creaking open, and the rhythmic sound of buckets filling at the well. You walk toward the village center, where the well stands like a lifeline. A group of women gathers there, chatting softly as they haul up heavy wooden pails. The ropes creak, the pulleys groan, and the sound of splashing water mixes with laughter and gossip. You watch one woman adjust her shawl, her hands rough from years of work, yet her smile bright. Scholars still argue whether community bonds were stronger in medieval villages than in modern towns, but here the connection feels tangible, woven from necessity more than sentiment. A man with a small cart passes by, his donkey trudging dutifully ahead. The cart's wooden wheels squeal with every rotation. It's loaded with bundles of wool, jars of honey, and a few precious candles, trade goods for the nearby market town. You nod as he passes, and he returns the gesture, eyes tired but kind. Everyone here understands one another's struggle without words. As the sun rises, the mist begins to lift, revealing rolling fields beyond the village. A faint path snakes toward the horizon, a road to somewhere larger, noisier, and more dangerous. You decide to follow it, curious to see what lies beyond. Your boots squelch in the damp earth, and birds scatter from hedgerows as you walk. The air smells of wet hay and wood smoke. Every step forward feels like crossing centuries. Soon you reach a small manor estate. A wooden gate marks the entrance, guarded by two men with spears. They watch you closely, but don't stop you. Inside, you see the stark contrast between peasant life and noble privilege. The house isn't extravagant by modern standards, but it's solid. Stone walls, glass windows, and a tiled roof. That alone makes it a fortress of wealth. Scholars still argue whether such estates represented exploitation or stability, but standing here, you can sense both truths woven together. Servants bustle about the courtyard, one scrubbing pots, another feeding chickens, a third mending a saddle. A stable boy leads a sleek horse toward the trough, its mane glistening with care that no human in the village could ever afford. You spot the Lord himself, a tall figure with a trimmed beard, barking orders with casual authority. He wears a wool cloak fastened with silver, a small fortune pinned to his shoulder. He doesn't acknowledge you, and that feels right. In his world, you don't exist. Your background, labor, air. The division here is absolute,
sacred almost. You think of the peasants you left behind, their cracked hands and weary smiles, and feel a pang of quiet resentment. Yet you also understand that without the Lord's estate, there's no protection, no structure, no order. The system holds because everyone accepts their place, willingly or not. You wander around the edge of the property, observing details. Laundry flaps on lines behind the kitchen, a pig snuffles through scraps near the fence, and the faint sound of a lute drifts from an open window. The melody is haunting, simple, and strangely comforting. For a moment, it feels like the world here isn't all suffering. There's beauty hidden in corners, fleeting but real. Then a sudden shout breaks the calm. A servant has dropped a pitcher, shards scattering across the ground. The Lord's voice cuts through the air, sharp, furious. You freeze as he storms over, raising his hand. The servant flinches, bracing for impact, but the strike never lands. The Lord merely snarls something under his breath and walks away. The silence afterward is heavier than the threat itself. You realize that mercy here isn't kindness, it's exhaustion. As the day warms, you continue along the road. Merchants pass in small groups, their carts rattling with goods, spices, cloth, and occasionally iron tools. They wear long cloaks and wide hats, their eyes scanning the horizon for danger. Bandits are a constant fear. You overhear one man say that a caravan was robbed just last week near the forest bend. They took everything, he mutters, even the driver's boots. You shiver, suddenly aware of how fragile travel is in this world. You pause by a wayside shrine, a small wooden cross surrounded by candles and flowers. Someone has left a loaf of bread as an offering. You stand quietly, feeling the stillness. Faith here isn't optional, it's armor. The people don't just believe, they depend on belief the way you depend on air. Scholars still argue whether medieval faith was driven by fear or devotion, but in this quiet moment, it feels like both. The road leads you to a small inn, its signs swinging in the breeze, paint faded, wood cracked. You push open the heavy door, and the smell of smoke, ale, and roasting meat greets you like an old friend. Inside, travelers huddle near the hearth, boots steaming from the damp. A bard strums a soft tune, singing of distant wars and lost loves. The melody curls through the air, wrapping the room in melancholy warmth. You sit at a table, the wood sticky with old spills, and order a drink. The innkeeper nods, wiping his hands on his apron. The ale arrives cloudy and warm, but you drink it anyway. It tastes faintly of earth, metal, and something sour, but it's strangely satisfying. As night falls, the fire crackles, and conversation rises in low hums. Merchants whisper deals, travelers trade stories, and someone laughs too loudly in the corner. You realize that this small, smoky room is a crossroads of lives. Peasants, nobles' messengers, pilgrims, maybe even outlaws, all sharing warmth and risk in equal measure. Outside, the wind howls softly through the cracks in the shutters. You take another sip and feel your eyelids grow heavy. Life here is relentless, but tonight, surrounded by strangers and flickering firelight, it feels almost safe. Almost.
Dawn arrives with a gray, hesitant light filtering through the inn's wooden shutters. You step outside, the cold air biting at your cheeks, carrying the faint scent of damp straw and smoke. The streets are quieter now, the echoes of last night's laughter replaced by the soft murmur of waking townsfolk. You notice a baker hauling heavy sacks of flour, a woman sweeping the steps of her cottage, and children running barefoot to the well. Life has resumed its endless, cyclical rhythm, indifferent to your fatigue. You wander toward the market square, where stalls are being set up for the day. The smell of fresh bread, cheese, and roasted grains hangs in the air, mingling with less pleasant odors, unwashed wool, manure, and the faint tang of sweat. You watch a vendor arrange fruits and vegetables, the colors vibrant against the drab backdrop of stone and mud.
Scholars still argue whether medieval markets were centers of economic innovation or merely survival hubs, but from your perspective, they are both, a chaotic pulse of trade and necessity. The crowd begins to swell. Merchants shout advertising goods. Fine wool, fresh eggs, spices from far lands. Children run between legs, dodging carts, while dogs weave through the chaos. You notice a man bartering fiercely, gesturing with hands calloused from labor, while the merchant frowns, weighing every coin with precision. Trade is survival here, sharpened into a practiced art of negotiation and risk. Animals add to the sensory overload. Chickens cluck and peck at the dirt, goats bleat from small pens, and horses stamp impatiently, nostrils flaring. You sidestep a pig rooting through discarded scraps, narrowly avoiding its snout. Scholars still debate how hygiene concerns affected market design, but it's clear that sanitation was an afterthought. Your modern sensibilities clash with this reality constantly. You pass a man sharpening a knife against a stone, sparks flying as the metal grinds. His skill is impressive, but the risk of injury is ever present. One slip, one miscalculation, and a small cut could become life-threatening. Scholars still argue about accident rates among artisans and laborers, but you sense the danger is omnipresent, woven into every task, no matter how mundane. Street performers add a strange charm to the market. A juggler tosses knives high into the air, catching them with dangerous precision. Children gasp and clap. Adults watch with cautious amusement. Nearby, a bard strums a lute, singing of lost kings and heroic deeds, a melancholy note cutting through the clamor. You realize that entertainment is not luxury here, it's survival, a momentary reprieve from the grinding routine of labor and worry. Haggling continues around you. You witness a heated exchange over a basket of onions. Voices rise, fingers point, and finally, coins change hands. Everyone seems to understand the unspoken rules. Push too hard, and you risk insult. Concede too quickly, and you risk poverty. Survival, you note, requires both courage and cunning. Scholars still debate how much negotiation skill influenced social mobility, but in this bustling square, it clearly matters. A sudden commotion draws your attention. A young boy has toppled a barrel, sending apples rolling across the cobblestones. He scrambles to gather them, but the crowd laughs instead of helping. The merchant scolds, the boy blushes, and life moves on. Moments like this, small, chaotic, humorous, pepper the otherwise harsh rhythm of medieval existence. Scholars still argue whether public punishment served justice or spectacle, and here it feels like both. Food smells dominate the air as the day progresses. Roasted meat, fresh bread, and fried pies mingle with the odor of manure and unwashed bodies. You're drawn to a small stall selling warm, crusty bread. You buy a loaf, tearing off a piece and savoring it, flour dusting your fingers, steam rising with each bite. Scholars still debate whether medieval diets were nutritionally adequate, but you can tell that for most, survival depends more on quantity than quality. As the sun climbs higher, shadows lengthen under the stalls. Merchants grow weary, children tire, and animals seek shade. You notice that despite the chaos, a rhythm emerges. Movement, trade, interaction, then brief moments of pause. The market is a microcosm of medieval life itself. Messy, dangerous, exhausting, but essential. You feel a sense of awe for the people who navigate it daily, balancing risk, need, and fleeting joy. By late afternoon, the crowd begins to thin. Stalls are packed up, coins counted, and goods stored away. The streets, once buzzing, are quieter, save for the occasional cart rumbling over cobblestones. You pause to watch a woman sweep the leftover dirt and straw, her movements precise and habitual. Life goes on.
steady and unyielding. Scholars still argue whether medieval urban life offered upward mobility or trapped people in cycles of survival, but you realize the answer varies with each individual story. As you step away from the square, you feel the pulse of the town lingering in your chest, the constant hum of labor, trade, and human endeavor. Survival here is a complex dance, a blend of endurance, cunning, and a touch of luck. You glance at the horizon where fields stretch toward distant hills and understand that beyond this market, countless other worlds exist, each demanding its own resilience. By nightfall, the town settles into quiet murmurs. Fires crackle in homes, animals huddle, and distant church bells toll softly. You lie down in a small attic, listening to the gentle rhythm of a world that is both harsh and strangely beautiful. Tonight, you sleep knowing that life, in all its medieval messiness, continues, relentless, unforgiving, and utterly human.
You awake to the faint light of dawn filtering through a thin cloth covering the attic window. Outside, the village hums softly, the distant crow of a rooster, the clatter of wooden shoes on cobblestones, and the low murmur of people already beginning their day. Today, you decide to explore the edge of the forest that borders the town. Legends speak of bandits, wolves, and hidden treasures, but mostly you suspect it's mud, insects, and more hard work. Scholars still argue whether medieval forests were truly wild or carefully managed, but you're about to find out firsthand. Stepping into the trees, the air immediately changes. It's cooler, damper, and smells of earth, pine, and decay. Sunlight filters through the branches, casting mottled shadows on the forest floor. Birds chatter, a woodpecker taps rhythmically, and the distant snap of a twig reminds you that you're not alone. You brush past ferns and brambles, feeling their prickles tug at your clothes. The forest feels alive, alert, and slightly menacing. As you move deeper, the undergrowth thickens. Roots twist across the path, mud clings to your boots, and every step seems to sink slightly. You hear a rustle nearby and freeze, only to see a fox dart across the path, tail high, vanishing into the trees. Scholars still debate whether medieval wildlife was more abundant than today, or just less observed. But standing here, it's hard to deny the sense of raw, untamed life. Hunger strikes mid-morning, and you realize you forgot to pack provisions. You spot berries growing along the path. Some are plump and red, others shriveled or covered in insects. You pick cautiously, examining each before tasting. Sweet, tart, and slightly gritty, the berries are edible, barely. You wonder how many peasants or travelers survived entirely on foraged food, and shiver at the thought. Scholars still argue whether forest foraging was a skill taught systematically or learned through desperate trial. But your trial is happening in real time. The path twists and turns, revealing a small stream. Water trickles over smooth stones, clear enough to see minnows darting beneath the surface. You kneel to drink, the chill of the water shocking your senses. A duck paddles lazily by, quacking at your presence, as if scolding your intrusion. Scholars still debate whether freshwater sources were contaminated or safe, but for now, this stream feels like a brief oasis. Birdsong is suddenly interrupted by a distant shout. You freeze, straining to hear. Two men appear along the path, moving quickly, weapons slung casually over their shoulders. Bandits? Hunters? Travelers? The distinction is subtle, often a matter of intent. You hide behind a tree, heart pounding, and watch. The men pass without noticing, muttering to one another. You exhale slowly. Scholars still argue how common banditry truly was, but your modern nerves tell you it was terrifyingly real. As the day progresses, you stumble upon a clearing. Sunlight pours in, illuminating a patch of wildflowers that sway gently in the breeze. You sit for a moment, marveling at the beauty, the contrast between peril and peace. This is the duality of medieval life, harshness intertwined with fleeting moments of grace. Scholars still debate whether such natural spaces provided spiritual solace or were simply resources to exploit. But sitting here, you feel both. You continue along a winding path that eventually leads to a small wooden bridge over a deeper part of the stream. Moss covers the planks, and one step feels suspiciously weak. You test it carefully, heart in your throat. The bridge creaks ominously, but holds. You cross, marveling at how medieval infrastructure often relied on simple design and human caution rather than certainty. Scholars still argue whether bridges were primarily functional or symbolic, but this one clearly serves both purposes. By mid-afternoon, you've walked far enough to encounter a hermit's hut nestled against a hillside. Smoke curls from the chimney, the faint smell of herbs and cooking drifting through the air. The hermit waves as you approach, motioning for you to sit. His hands are gnarled, face sun-leathered, and eyes sharp despite age. He offers you a simple meal, stale bread, cheese, and herbal tea. You accept gratefully, realizing how rare hospitality can be in a world defined by survival. Scholars still argue whether hermits were isolated for religious devotion or practical necessity, but sitting here, you feel the weight of both reasons. He speaks quietly about the forest, the seasons, and the animals. His voice is calm, weaving stories that are part observation, part cautionary tale. You realize that knowledge of the land is a form of power here, survival distilled into wisdom passed orally. Scholars still debate the accuracy of such folklore, but listening, you sense truth embedded in every word. As evening approaches, you thank the hermit and begin the trek back to the village. The forest shifts with shadows lengthening and sounds change, owls calling, the rustle of small nocturnal preachers. You move more cautiously now, aware that darkness magnifies risk. Scholars still argue whether nighttime in medieval forests was particularly dangerous or exaggerated in tales, but your instincts tell you to be vigilant. By the time you reach the village outskirts, the sun has dipped low, painting the sky in muted oranges and purples. You're muddy, tired, and more aware than ever of the delicate balance between risk and survival in this world. Medieval life, you realize, is a constant negotiation with nature, with society, and with your own endurance. You step into the village. The familiar sounds and smells offer comfort. Smoke curls from chimneys, and the faint murmur of people preparing supper drifts through the air. You're exhausted, but there's satisfaction in knowing you've survived the day. Tomorrow will bring work, toil, and perhaps danger again. But for tonight, the forest's lessons linger, etched into your mind.
Dawn greets you with a crisp chill, and today you decide to follow the river that snakes lazily through the countryside. The water glints silver under the morning sun, and the gentle murmur of its flow is oddly soothing after yesterday's trials in the forest. Along its banks, reeds sway, and small fish dart through shallow pools. You pause to watch a heron stalk the shallows, its movements deliberate, almost regal. Scholars still argue whether rivers were primarily travel routes or lifelines for irrigation and sustenance. But today, you see both clearly. The muddy bank gives way underfoot, and you slide slightly, catching yourself on a gnarled root. Every step reminds you how precarious life can be in this world. One misstep, and injuries mount in a place with no modern medicine. Yet the river is alive with opportunity. You see women washing clothes in the current, beating tunics against rocks, while children splash at their feet. The air smells of wet fabric, soap made from ashes, and the faint tang of iron-rich water. Scholars still debate the efficacy of these primitive cleaning methods, but watching their practiced rhythm, you suspect they worked better than expected. Birdsong rises and falls like a gentle symphony. You notice the occasional kingfisher flash by, a sudden streak of electric blue. The riverbank teems with life. Frogs croak, insects buzz, and the occasional deer drinks warily at the edge. For a moment, the hardships of the village seem distant. Nature operates on a rhythm all its own, indifferent to human toil or time. Scholars still argue whether medieval humans revered nature or merely exploited it, but standing here, it feels like a bit of both. As you follow the river, you spot a fisherman setting up a net along the shallows. His hands are skilled, calloused from years of handling line and hook. He gestures at the water, murmuring advice to his son, who mimics his every movement. Patience and observation are key in this work, skills you realize you sorely lack. Scholars still debate whether medieval fishing techniques were sustainable or purely subsistence-driven, but it's clear that survival here demands intimate knowledge of the environment. You attempt to fish with a simple rod borrowed from the fisherman, but clumsily tangle your line in reeds. The boy giggles, and the man shakes his head, smiling faintly. "Practice," he says, in a voice soft yet firm. You nod, realizing that medieval life is filled with small, repetitive lessons, each one essential for keeping food on the table and staying alive. Scholars still debate whether this apprenticeship model of learning shaped social structures, but you sense its truth in every gesture. Lunch comes in the form of a modest loaf and some cheese from your pack. You sit on a rock, dipping the bread into cool river water to soften it. It tastes bland but satisfying, a reminder of how scarcity sharpens appreciation. Around you, the river continues its relentless flow, carrying leaves, twigs, and tiny creatures downstream. Scholars still debate the nutritional adequacy of medieval diets, but for now, survival is more about sustenance than pleasure. Mid-afternoon brings a sudden shower. You duck under a willow, watching as raindrops ripple across the water. Mud clings to your boots, and the chill bites at your skin. But there's a strange beauty in the moment. Lightning flashes in the distance, though thunder is muffled by the river valley. You realize that medieval life was always subject to the whims of weather, a constant negotiation with forces beyond human control. Scholars still argue whether climate impacted social unrest, but standing here, it's clear that nature ruled all. The rain passes quickly, leaving the world glistening and renewed. Tiny streams form along the banks, carrying sediment and fallen leaves. You take a cautious step back onto the path, aware that slippery rocks could be hazardous. Even a minor injury near the river could become fatal if infection sets in. Medieval medicine is limited and often dubious. Scholars still debate whether herbal remedies were effective or placebo, but necessity dictated that people try everything available. Toward evening, you notice a small wooden bridge spanning a narrower section of the river. Its planks are slick with moss, and it creaks ominously under your weight. You step lightly, one foot after another, feeling the wood bend beneath you. On the far side, a clearing opens up into farmland, where peasants are gathering crops and tending livestock. The juxtaposition of wilderness and human order is striking, a visual reminder of the constant struggle between nature and survival. By nightfall, you return to the village, boots soaked and clothes damp. Smoke rises from cottages, mingling with the earthy scent of rain-soaked fields. You pause for a moment, listening to the rhythmic croak of frogs, the rustle of animals, and the distant hum of a town settling into evening. You realize how intertwined life is with the landscape, how every choice, where to walk, where to fish, how to cook, is guided by survival. Scholars still debate whether medieval humans truly understood ecological balance, but today you feel it instinctively. Exhausted but enlightened, you step into a small inn, welcomed by warmth, firelight, and the muttered chatter of villagers. Tonight, you will sleep to the murmur of the river and the distant calls of animals, comforted by the fact that, for a brief time, you've touched the pulse of life beyond the village, a life equal parts danger, beauty, and relentless perseverance. Morning arrives heavy with fog, and today you venture toward the hilltop castle overlooking the village. From a distance, its stone walls loom like a fortress of ancient authority. Towers pierce the mist, banners snapping in the wind, and the faint clatter of a drawbridge signals early activity. You feel a mix of awe and apprehension. This is a place of power, protection, and rigid hierarchy, where every stone and shadow carries meaning. Scholars still debate whether castles were more symbolic or functional. But standing here, both aspects are undeniable. The path up is steep and treacherous, slick with morning dew. You navigate around puddles and loose stones, your muscles protesting with every step. Alongside the path, soldiers patrol in chainmail, their boots heavy, their eyes sharp. You sense that rules are absolute here. Misstep or misbehavior could invite punishment or humiliation. Scholars still argue how strictly medieval lords enforced laws within their walls, but even observing quietly, you feel the weight of authority pressing down. As you reach the first gate, the drawbridge lowers, revealing a courtyard bustling with activity. Servants rush to carry water, piles of timber and food supplies. Horses whinny in stables, their coats glossy and well-kept, a stark contrast to the village animals you saw yesterday. The Lord's presence is subtle but commanding, a figure on the steps, issuing curt orders while observing every motion. You realize that a castle is a world unto itself, hierarchical, controlled, yet alive with its own rhythm. Inside, the halls are dim and cool. Torches flicker against stone walls, casting long shadows. Tapestries depict battles and hunting scenes, their colors faded yet vibrant enough to impress. You notice the effort put into decoration, luxury and intimidation intertwined. Scholars still argue whether such decor was meant to inspire awe or enforce loyalty, but it certainly conveys both. A table is set for midday meals. Food is laid out in abundance: roasted meats, bread, cheeses, fruits, and wine. You watch servants carry dishes with care, aware that each plate represents labor from many hands, both in the castle and the surrounding lands. Scholars still debate the extent of feasting in noble households, but the display here is undeniable, a daily performance of wealth and control. You wander into the armory, a room heavy with the scent of iron, oil, and leather. Suits of armor line the walls, helmets polished to a dull shine. Weapons of every size are meticulously arranged: swords, axes, lances. A soldier demonstrates a crossbow, loading and releasing it with practiced ease. Scholars still argue how effective medieval arms truly were in battle, but watching the precision and strength required, you understand their intimidation was as psychological as practical. The chapel within the castle offers a moment of contrast. Candles flicker along stone walls, illuminating intricate carvings of saints and martyrs. The air is thick with incense, mingling with the faint chill of the stone. A priest murmurs prayers, and you feel the gravity of faith pressing here as strongly as authority does elsewhere. Scholars still debate whether castles were spiritual as well as military centers, but the presence of the chapel affirms both functions. From the battlements, you can see the entire village sprawled below. Smoke rises from chimneys, animals roam pastures, and fields stretch toward distant forests. The perspective is humbling. You see how tightly human labor, nature, and authority intertwine. A sudden gust of wind carries the faint clatter of the drawbridge and the distant laughter of children playing in the village. You realize that while castles dominate physically, life elsewhere persists independently, stubbornly resilient. You linger near the edge of a tower, imagining the soldiers scanning for threats, the lord plotting alliances, and the peasants working tirelessly below. Survival here is layered, governed by rules, status, and the ever-present threat of danger. Scholars still argue whether medieval fortresses truly enhanced security or merely symbolized control, but looking out over the land, both are clear. As the sun dips toward evening, you leave the castle, descending the steep path with muscles protesting once again. The mist has lifted, revealing the village in its full, chaotic beauty. Life continues, unrelenting, yet familiar. Tonight, the castle lights flicker like distant stars, a reminder of power, hierarchy, and the delicate balance that defines medieval existence. The morning air carries the scent of smoke and damp earth as you set out to explore the village's farmlands. The fields stretch wide, dotted with peasants bending over rows of crops, their backs curved under the weight of labor. You notice the intricate patterns of furrows and irrigation channels, simple, efficient, and entirely dependent on human effort. Scholars still debate whether medieval agriculture could sustain populations effectively, but seeing it in motion, you understand the precarious balance between labor, land, and survival. A group of women harvest vegetables, their hands swift and sure. They sing softly as they work, melodies threading through the hum of daily toil. You pause to watch, fascinated by the coordination. Baskets are filled, bundles tied, and produce carried to waiting carts without a single misstep. Scholars still argue whether song in work served purely morale or also measured rhythm, but its effect is undeniable. You feel your own movements falter without such cadence. Nearby, a man drives a wooden plow pulled by 2 oxen. Their hooves sink slightly in the moist soil, and the sound of the wooden blade scraping the earth is almost musical. You approach cautiously, trying not to disturb the rhythm. The man waves briefly, acknowledging your presence without breaking concentration. Scholars still debate whether plowing techniques varied regionally or remained largely uniform, but you note the careful precision in each pass. Children are scattered among the fields, some tending smaller plots, others playing with sticks fashioned as swords. Their laughter contrasts sharply with the adults' muted concentration. It's a reminder that even in a world dominated by survival, moments of levity persist. Scholars still argue whether children truly understood labor or were simply apprenticed early, but watching them, you see both curiosity and responsibility shaping their small hands. Lunch is a simple affair. Bread, salted fish, and a handful of berries you foraged earlier. You sit on a low mound, observing the village sprawled below, smoke rising from cottages, livestock moving lazily, and a group of villagers hauling hay to a barn. Each action seems mundane, yet every task is essential for survival. Scholars still debate the nutritional adequacy of medieval meals, but you feel gratitude for the modest feast before you. By afternoon, the sun climbs higher and the air thickens with heat and dust. Sweat soaks your shirt and your muscles protest with every movement. You notice a small group constructing a wooden fence around a newly cleared plot. Hammers clang, ropes strain, and voices call instructions across the site. The work is grueling, yet there's a rhythm, a flow that transforms exhaustion into accomplishment. Scholars still argue whether medieval laborers had any sense of leisure, but watching this, it seems fleeting, earned in stolen moments rather than granted freely. In the distance, a shepherd tends a flock of sheep on the hillside. The animals graze contentedly, oblivious to human toil. The shepherd uses a whistle, a few gentle shouts, and a trained dog to guide the flock with surprising precision. You marvel at the seamless communication between human, animal, and landscape, a quiet testament to the ingenuity of survival. Scholars still debate the origins of shepherding techniques, but you recognize the timelessness of this knowledge. As evening approaches, shadows stretch across the fields. Villagers begin to gather tools, returning livestock to pens, stacking harvests in barns. Smoke curls from chimneys as fires are lit for evening meals. You pause to watch a woman carry a basket of freshly harvested vegetables, balancing it effortlessly on her hip while conversing softly with a neighbor. Scholars still argue whether medieval communities relied more on shared labor or individual effort, but here, cooperation is clearly vital. The fading light turns the village golden, illuminating the toil, the mud, and the quiet dignity of daily life. Despite the relentless labor, the rhythmic hum of activity offers a strange comfort. You notice the small victories, the basket balanced without spilling, a field plowed straight, a child successfully guiding a flock. Each is minor, yet monumental in a world where survival is a constant challenge. By nightfall, you return to the village center. Fires glow warmly through windows, laughter and muted conversations drift on the breeze, and animals settle for the night. You sink into a quiet corner, exhausted, but deeply aware of the intricate balance sustaining this world. Scholars still debate how medieval people coped with relentless labor, yet the answer is evident: endurance, community, and a willingness to face each day as it comes. Dawn breaks gray and muted, and today you find yourself drawn to the village smithy. The rhythmic pounding of hammer on anvil reaches you even before you see the structure. Metal clanging against metal, sparks flying like miniature fireworks into the air. Inside, the blacksmith works tirelessly, muscles taut, sweat gleaming on his skin. The heat from the forge hits you immediately, a wall of warmth and danger. Scholars still argue whether blacksmithing was more of an art or purely functional, but standing here, it is clearly both. You watch him shape a blade from glowing iron, every strike precise, deliberate. The anvil rings out, resonating deep in your chest, and you realize that this sound is the heartbeat of the village itself. Sparks shower around him, and the smell of molten metal mingles with soot and sweat. A young apprentice mirrors his movements, learning the rhythm of heat, weight, and force. Scholars still debate how long apprenticeships lasted or how rigorous they truly were, but this boy's concentration tells you it's years, not weeks. Outside, villagers pass by with tools to repair, plow blades, horseshoes, or cooking implements. Each item reflects careful maintenance and dependency. Without the smith, survival falters. You notice a cartwheel being repaired, iron fittings hammered into place with sharp precision. The blacksmith explains the process with few words, trusting experience over instruction manuals. Scholars still argue whether medieval craft knowledge was systematically documented or orally transmitted, and here it's certainly the latter. You attempt to hold a hammer yourself, striking the cooled iron lightly. Sparks are absent, but the weight surprises you. The blacksmith chuckles, shaking his head. "Patience," he says. "Metal teaches you when to listen." You nod, feeling the wisdom embedded in his simple statement. Survival in this world is as much about patience as it is about strength. Scholars still debate whether medieval trades valued skill or brute force more, but watching him, skill clearly dominates. Lunch comes in the form of smoked meat and coarse bread, shared with the apprentice in a brief respite from work. The meal is simple but nourishing. Outside, the village hums with activity, children playing, women gathering water, men hauling goods. The rhythm of life continues unbroken, a testament to the endurance required for survival. Scholars still argue whether medieval diets were sufficient for sustained labor, but from the forge, the sustenance seems practical, if unremarkable. Afternoon brings new challenges. The blacksmith demonstrates the creation of a horseshoe, explaining the importance of balance, curvature, and fit. You attempt a crude imitation, bending metal with trembling hands. Sparks fly unpredictably, clanging off the anvil. He smiles faintly, correcting your stance, your grip, your swing. Every mistake is a lesson, every correction a step toward mastery. Scholars still debate the learning curve for medieval artisans, but clearly it was steep and unforgiving. The village horses are brought in for shoeing. You watch as the blacksmith lifts a horse's hoof effortlessly, reading its shape, adjusting the shoe to fit perfectly. The animal shifts slightly, but submission is earned, not forced. Scholars still argue whether medieval horses were bred for function or status, but their utility is undeniable. They are lifelines in agriculture, travel, and trade. As shadows lengthen, you step outside, wiping soot from your hands. The setting sun bathes the village in warm golden light. Smoke curls lazily from chimneys, and the hum of distant conversation drifts through the air. You realize that the smithy, with its heat, rhythm, and expertise, represents a microcosm of medieval life. Intense labor, skillful hands, and the constant interdependence of the community. By nightfall, the forge is quiet, the anvil cooled, and the village settles into a soft murmur. You lie down in a small attic, hands still blackened with soot, and reflect on the day. Strength, patience, and survival intertwined in metal, fire, and sweat. Scholars still debate the impact of craft on social mobility, but you know that in this world, mastery of skill is survival. Tonight, the rhythm of the hammer fades, leaving only the whisper of the wind and your steady breathing. Morning arrives with a pale, washed-out light, and today you decide to visit the village healer. Her small hut sits at the edge of the settlement, smoke curling from the chimney and the scent of herbs drifting into the morning air. Inside, dried plants hang from rafters, jars of powders and potions line shelves, and the faint sound of chanting hums softly from a corner. Scholars still debate whether medieval medicine was rooted more in superstition or observation, but standing here, it feels like a careful blend of both. The healer greets you with a nod, her eyes sharp yet kind. She demonstrates a poultice, kneading herbs into a paste, explaining which ailments it addresses: cuts, bruises, fevers, and the more mysterious humors of the body. You notice the precision in her movements, each pinch of herb, each careful stir, seemingly minor but critical. Scholars still argue whether herbal remedies were genuinely effective, but centuries of use suggest at least partial success. She shows you a small cabinet of tinctures, each labeled in fading ink. Some smell sweet, others pungent, a few almost unbearably bitter. You learn that taste often signals potency or danger. A slip of judgment could worsen illness or even kill. Scholars still debate the accuracy of medieval diagnosis methods, but you see the healer's knowledge is both practical and empirical, shaped by trial, observation, and necessity. A villager enters with a limp, explaining he fell while tending sheep. The healer examines his leg, muttering softly, palpating the joint, wrapping it with cloth soaked in herbal ointment. You watch, fascinated by the calm efficiency and the subtle communication between healer and patient. Scholars still argue whether medieval care prioritized comfort or simply delayed death, but watching this, it's clear she achieves a balance. The apprentice sits quietly in a corner, grinding dried roots into powder. You help for a moment, feeling the grit between your fingers. It's tedious work, but essential. Scholars still debate whether apprenticeship in medicine fostered innovation or simply preserved tradition, but each task here clearly passes knowledge forward. Outside, the village continues its rhythm. Children run barefoot across muddy paths. Women carry water from the well. Men haul firewood. Life persists relentlessly, and the healer is the quiet anchor, tending to its vulnerable threads. Scholars still argue whether the mortality rates were as high as records suggest, but each intervention here may tip the balance between life and death. Lunch is humble: bread, cheese, and a thin broth simmered over a hearth. You sit with the healer, listening to her stories about past patients, outbreaks, and near miracles. The soft cadence of her voice is soothing, almost meditative, a contrast to the harshness of labor outside. Scholars still debate whether storytelling in medicine was therapeutic or purely educational, but here it clearly serves both functions. Afternoon brings a lesson in herbal identification. She guides you into the surrounding fields, pointing out plants by leaf shape, scent, and habitat. You kneel, touch, and smell each one, realizing that survival often relies on subtle observation and memory. Scholars still argue whether medieval humans truly understood their environment or relied on rote memorization, but firsthand you feel knowledge grow with every step. A sudden cough echoes nearby, a reminder that illness is constant. The healer quickly mixes a tincture, demonstrating urgency and precision. You watch her administer it, seeing how skill, knowledge, and care intertwine in daily survival. Scholars still debate the effectiveness of medieval remedies against serious infections, but in this context, hope itself is part of the cure. As evening falls, you return to the village center, dusk painting cottages in soft gold and purple. Smoke rises from chimneys, animals settle down, and the distant church bell tolls. You reflect on the day, the healer's skill, the quiet rhythm of care, and the fragile balance between life and death. Scholars still argue whether medieval medicine was progressive or primitive, but in this moment, it is undeniably vital. Tonight, you lie in a small attic, hands still faintly fragrant with herbs, listening to the soft murmur of the village. Life is precarious, yes, but threaded with knowledge, resilience, and the gentle pulse of care. In the flickering candlelight, you drift toward sleep, aware that the healer's lessons linger, both in your mind and in the wider, enduring rhythm of survival. Dawn spreads pale light over the village, and today you venture toward the local tavern, a hub of gossip, laughter, and sometimes trouble. The building smells of spilled ale, smoke, and damp wood. Inside, the murmur of conversation rises as villagers discuss crops, weather, and rumors of distant conflicts. Scholars still argue whether taverns were centers of social cohesion or breeding grounds for dissent, but standing here, they clearly serve both purposes. A bard strums a lute in the corner, fingers nimble over the strings, singing tales of heroes, lost loves, and distant wars. Patrons clap, cheer, or murmur along, connecting through shared stories. The melody is cheerful, yet tinged with melancholy, a reflection of life's constant push and pull between joy and hardship. Scholars still debate the role of oral storytelling in shaping medieval culture. But watching this, its power to unite and entertain is undeniable. You sit at a rough wooden table, observing interactions. Merchants discuss trade, farmers recount market mishaps, and a group of travelers shares news from towns far away. Each conversation reveals information vital to survival, weather predictions, market prices, and social alliances. Scholars still argue whether such spaces were primarily educational or recreational, but it's evident that both functions coexist. Ale flows freely, though it's thin and often bitter. You take a cautious sip, noting its warmth and slight sourness. Alcohol serves not only as sustenance, but also as a social lubricant, easing tension in a world governed by labor, hierarchy, and constant vigilance. Scholars still debate whether medieval tavern drinks were safe to consume or merely a necessary risk, but for villagers, it is routine. Outside, the sun climbs higher, casting long shadows through open windows. A group of children chase one another across the courtyard, their laughter mingling with the hum of adult conversation. Animals wander freely, dogs sniffing at tables, cats slinking around barrels, chickens pecking at spilled grain. Life continues, chaotic and vibrant, and the tavern is at the heart of it. A sudden argument breaks out between two patrons over a trivial debt. Voices rise, hands gesture, and tension crackles in the air. The innkeeper intervenes with a sharp voice, diffusing the situation with authority. Scholars still argue whether medieval conflicts were more frequent in taverns or marketplaces. But here, the immediacy of resolution underscores the delicate balance of social order. You notice small details: a woman carrying a basket of herbs, a man sharpening a knife, a bard swapping tales for coins. Every interaction, every movement is part of an intricate web of survival and social cohesion. Scholars still debate how much leisure time villagers actually had, but here it's evident that work and recreation often blur, merging into the rhythm of daily life. Afternoon brings a lull. Patrons nap against walls. The bard tunes his lute, and the sun filters warmly through the windows. You step outside briefly, taking in the sounds of the village: the clatter of carts, the lowing of cows, the laughter of children. The tavern, in its dimly lit interior, is a microcosm of village life: connection, conflict, sustenance, and storytelling, all woven together. As evening approaches, fires are lit, candles flicker, and the tavern hums with renewed energy. You realize that, like every part of the village, it serves both practical and emotional needs: food, drink, information, and human connection, all in one. Scholars still debate whether such communal spaces shaped cultural norms or reflected them, but experiencing it firsthand, you understand the indispensable role taverns played. By nightfall, you leave the tavern, ears ringing with music, laughter, and conversation. The village is quiet now, fires glowing warmly, animals settled, and distant church bells tolling. You walk home, reflecting on the vibrancy, chaos, and subtle order of social life in medieval communities. Tonight you sleep with the echoes of songs, arguments, and laughter still resonating, a reminder that survival is never solely physical. It is social, emotional, and deeply human. The morning dawns soft and quiet, with a haze lingering over the village like a gentle sigh. Today, you decide to explore the village outskirts, where the pastures meet the wild, and human labor fades into nature's untamed rhythm. A narrow path winds between hedgerows, leading past grazing animals and tilled fields that gradually give way to meadows dotted with wildflowers. Scholars still debate how frequently villagers ventured beyond cultivated land, but standing here, the blend of human toil and natural freedom is unmistakable. You tread carefully over soft earth, noting the rich scent of damp grass, wild herbs, and the faint tang of livestock. Birds call overhead, insects buzz, and the occasional rabbit darts through the undergrowth. The contrast between village and meadow is striking. One is orderly, structured, and driven by necessity. The other, chaotic, indifferent, and alive with its own rules. Scholars still argue whether medieval people saw such spaces as threatening or restorative, but you feel a strange peace walking among them. A small stream meanders lazily across the meadow, glinting silver in the morning sun. You stoop to drink, the water crisp and refreshing. Around it, frogs croak and dragonflies skim the surface, while reeds sway gently in the breeze. You notice the intricate balance of life here, fragile yet resilient. Scholars still debate whether proximity to natural water sources shaped settlement patterns, but observing it firsthand, survival seems intimately tied to these simple, sustaining elements. Moving further, you spot the remnants of an abandoned hut, its walls crumbling and roof long gone. Wildflowers and grasses reclaim the space, and a fox darts from the shadows. The hut reminds you of the impermanence of human endeavor, especially in a world where labor and survival are constant. Scholars still argue whether abandonment was due to conflict, disease, or economics, but here, nature quietly asserts its dominance. As noon approaches, the sun warms your back, and you notice small details, bees buzzing around clover, mushrooms sprouting near tree roots, and birds circling overhead. Every sound and movement is part of a vast, interconnected ecosystem. Scholars still debate how much medieval humans understood ecological relationships, but your senses pick up subtle interactions that indicate deep, if unspoken, knowledge. A sudden rustle in the tall grass alerts you to deer grazing nearby. You pause, holding your breath, watching the delicate creatures move gracefully, ears flicking, tails twitching. Scholars still argue whether medieval hunting disrupted wildlife populations or was sustainable, but observing these deer, their cautious freedom, seems a fragile triumph. Afternoon wanes and shadows stretch across the meadow. You rest under a tree, the breeze gentle, the grass soft beneath you. Thoughts drift lazily, the forest you traversed, the river's quiet flow, the castle's imposing presence, the smithy's forge, the healer's care, the schoolhouse, the black market, and the festival. Each thread weaves into a tapestry of life, both brutal and beautiful, where survival, joy, and human ingenuity coexist. Scholars still debate the relative hardships of medieval existence, but after walking through these spaces, you understand the full spectrum. As the sun sets, painting the sky in oranges and purples, you make your way back to the village. Smoke curls from chimneys, animals settle, and a soft hum of human life continues as night falls. You feel the weight of history pressing softly on your shoulders. Every cobblestone, furrowed field, and stone wall a testament to endurance, creativity, and adaptation. Tonight, you rest, carrying the lessons, textures, and rhythms of a day spent exploring the delicate balance of medieval life.
The village is quiet now, bathed in the soft glow of moonlight. Smoke drifts lazily from chimneys, curling into the cool night air, mingling with the faint scent of earth and grass. The animals settle into their pens, their breaths slow and rhythmic, and even the distant forest seems to sigh gently, a lullaby in its own language. You sink into a corner of your small room, muscles aching from the day's wanderings, yet comforted by the steady pulse of life all around. Outside, the wind whispers through trees, leaves brushing softly against one another. The distant call of an owl is muffled and serene, and the faint trickle of the river reaches your ears like a soothing reminder of continuity. You breathe deeply, letting the scents and sounds of the medieval landscape fill your senses. Smoke, mud, herbs, and the quiet hum of human endeavor. Each sound, each movement is a thread in the intricate tapestry of survival, calm and fleeting beauty. Your thoughts drift lazily through the day's experiences, the forest's shadowy depths, the river's reflective calm, the imposing castle, the rhythmic forge, the healer's gentle hands, the schoolhouse's quiet discipline, the bustling market, and the festival's fleeting joy. Each memory settles like a soft feather, weightless yet grounding, reminding you of both the hardship and the resilience embedded in every corner of this world. As your eyelids grow heavy, the night wraps around you like a comforting blanket. The wind's soft hum, the animals' slow breathing, and the village's gentle rhythm guide you toward rest. Let your thoughts float along the meadows and streams, past the bustling streets and quiet fields, drifting ever closer to sleep. Tonight, the medieval world lingers softly around you, a gentle echo of endurance, curiosity, and quiet wonder.